Shavuot Tov to everybody. Good Tevach. Okay, we are holding at the conclusion, at the end of chapter 242, Reish Mem Beis, the first chapter of Hilchos Shabbos. Today we're going to begin chapter 243. We will give an intro to that section of chapters as soon as we get to it. Last week we concluded with a discussion regarding the Shabbos menu, falling under the category of Shabbos expenditure, how much one should be spending for the Shabbos Seudas. And we explained that the sky is the limit, the more the merrier, as whatever you spend for Shabbos does not come off your annual godly destined budget that cannot be detracted or added to throughout the year. But the Shabbos and Yontiv and Rosh Chodesh expenditures do not come from that. And I'll add one more, which I may get into big trouble for this one. Also, payments for educational systems of Torah education does not come out from the budget. Don't tell this to the Manalim of the yeshivas, please, or the Talmudei Torahs. I once heard someone use this against me. And we shouldn't, chas v'shalom for someone who runs a yeshiva or Talmud Torah or seminary to say, listen, what are you saying you don't have money? It doesn't come off your annual budget. So obviously everything has to be in Bekalim de Tikkun, in the vessels of Tikkun, not in the way of, so they can't say, well, since it doesn't come off your yearly budget, we'll charge you $30,000 a year like a college, well, less than a college, right? So obviously everything has its limitations in understanding. And in truth, the answer to that is if anyone says that the same Shulchan Aruch says that regarding tuition, the Ashirim pay for the tuition of the Aniyim. So in a normal society as it was 100 years ago, then the community leaders, the wealthy of the communities, would pay an education tax and they would fund all the yeshivas and Talmudei Torahs of the city from their wealth. Even though they did this with a smile and were very happy that they received the merit to do so, it was a forced tax. It wasn't a matter of option, it wasn't optional. And that's how everyone received the Torah education, but unfortunately we don't have this power today. But nonetheless, the Gemara in Eruvin, who records the four things that a person does not deduct from his yearly budget, includes also the tuition for Talmud Torah. So that was the maximum, and then we said that the minimum was, right, meat and wine, fish. We discussed in length everything about fish in the last class, and at the very least, writes the Alte Rebbe in the name of Magen Avram, the name of the Arizal, 2 cooked dishes, or as the Aruch HaShulchan points out, the Kaf HaChaim points out, if you already have 2 cooked dishes during the week, you should add 1 more, so that there is extra. Based on that point, we went ahead and discussed also that even though you are allowed to spend as much as you want for Kavod and Einik Shabbos and Yantif, as it doesn't come off your expenditure, all this is on condition Alte that you don't throw yourself onto the community. In other words, that the community is not the one funding your Shabbos extravagances, and that it is coming out of your pocket. We discussed regarding borrowing money to enhance Shabbos, and we said that a person may only borrow money, and if he does, it won't come out of his yearly budget. It's a good thing. It's praise for him to do so if he can offer collateral of the same worth or more to the lender. But if you can't offer a guarantee of payment to the lender, then that's where we enact the statement of the sages that we read in the Shulchan Aruch of the Mechaber, Tasa Shabbos Chachol, V'al Titztarech Labrius, make your Shabbos like the weekday and do not throw yourself onto the public. So again, that's the difference. With collateral, a way to pay back; without collateral, without a way to pay back. And from this we explain a fundament in Judaism: don't be machmir on other people's expense. You want to be machmir, let it be on your own pocket. But to borrow money to enhance Shabbos and not have a way to pay the guy back, you're being machmir. He's in essence paying for your enhancing of Shabbos. So chumras and hidurim have to be in the person's own expense. We discussed this in length last week. There's a few more points I want to clarify that we didn't get into properly last week, and that is on this idea, and that is as follows. regarding charity money. So the Alte Rebbe here discusses, it's like what is recorded in the Mishnah Berurah, that if an individual is anyways living off of charity, he receives a charity fund, for whatever reason, he's unable, he's unemployed, or his expenses, for whatever reason, are much higher than his income, so he receives charity money. In such a case that he's already halachically eligible for charity, he is allowed to use some of that money towards some extra extravagances for Shabbos and Yontif. He doesn't have to budget himself and say, don't throw yourself onto the public, I will only have bread and butter for Shabbos. No, once you're already halachically able to receive, you don't have to budget yourself in such a manner. However, if you have money to survive the week and you just want money for the extra of Shabbos, that's when we tell you no, you do not receive from the charity fund. To understand this a little better, basically back in the day, it's explained in Hilchos, which we'll eventually get to, and it's in chapter, in your day, I believe it's chapter Reish and Aleph 252. So there it is explained that there were three charity funds that existed. You had the Kupa, you had the Tamchoy, and you had another one which was a global charity fund for different purposes. One was for like a monthly salary, one was for the week, and one was for the day. Every day they would give out like bread and different foods. It was like the food bank, okay, that they would give out food for people's in need. And there were different standards of who would make it, who was eligible for which charity. Like for the Tamchoy, the daily meals, anyone, even if you were a guest. But to receive the monthly stipend, you would have to be a Taishav Hamakim, you have to be a member of the city. So these things have been extinct already for many, many years, generations already, with the fall of organized Jewish communities and autonomy that we receive from government. So these ideas that were once enacted in Jewish communities hundreds of years after the destruction, this didn't end with the destruction of the temple. There were still organized Jewish communities even afterwards, but nonetheless today this is no longer applicable. But this is the idea of what was discussed there, that charity fund would not give the Shabbos foods.
So today in many communities they have something called the Tamchu Shabbos. That's a
right.
Thing.
So over there, I don't think they're doing a din v'cheshbon. Do you have enough money for the week? If you do, according to halacha, we don't give you Shabbos food. The whole idea of that fund is to help people fulfill the, have extra Shabbos delicacies. And since people are giving the money al das kain on that commitment, so Alte Rebbe, that's the next point. Alte Rebbe says that it is mutter to give someone a present for that purpose. It's mutter to give a matana. It's if someone wants to give a matana, it's not a problem. But to receive from the charity fund that's meant for paupers, that a person cannot do if he has enough money to celebrate, to feed himself during the week, including a basic meal for Shabbos. But you're touching on a good point. V'tzarachin, exactly how that works is we want to deduct from Meiser to donate to such an organization. On the other hand, you can claim, well, the Torah says, make your Shabbos like a weekday. How can you now take it off charity? Okay. On the other hand, it could be it's just basics of meat and fish, which you need. That's protein. You need food to eat. It's not like, it's nice to have it once a week dedicated for Shabbos, but it's also necessary for your health. So it would also depend on what they're giving. If they were giving, 5-star meals of, that only the wealthy receive, then I would agree with you. It's kind of questionable how you can take that off charity.
But when I was in LA, then for many years I was giving the Tamchoy Shabbos, and then I got laid off from work, and then I ended up being a recipient. So what they sent me is once a week, like on a Thursday, they sent me a box, and the box had basically chicken, eggs, milk. It basically had staples, as I remember, more or less.
Right, so that's... Right. Let's not forget also that today all of these halachas of eligibility for charity have greatly been changed and varied, being that our standard of living is no longer the same as back in the day. Back in the day, all you needed was some wood over your head, and a nice bowl of soup, and maybe a meat once in a while, and you were good to go. Today we need electricity. Today we need a car. Today we need running water. We have so many different greater needs today, and different expenses that are considered part of the basic necessities of life, which today are included in the basic needs for charity. So, you know, the cheshbonos, the calculations that are done today are not really done in the way it was done back then of eligibility. But one thing is for sure, that if somebody has a certain amount of money in his bank account, then he may not be eligible for receiving from any charity fund. I was once approached by an individual who was collecting money for a family that never had a terrible tragedy happen to them. The father passed away and left 8 orphans, or whatever number it was, I don't remember. And they wanted to discuss with me different points, and they asked me, listen, well, I knew about this family. I had spoken to the husband before he passed away, and I knew that they had an insurance, that they had a life insurance payment that would be in the excess of $1 million shekel. So I told the guy, are you aware of this payment? And he said, we are aware, but we're not telling anyone. I said, that's stealing. You have to tell the charity funds, because someone who has $1 million shekel in the bank, no matter how much of a nebuch they are, and it is a terrible situation, you say, one has nothing to do with the other. One second, let me just finish the point. One has nothing to do with the other, and if somebody has a certain amount of money to his name, it's different ways of calculating it. So the Igros Moshe once gave a number of $3,000 per family member. It goes up and down with inflation. It all depends on basic, how much money do you need for basic living standards. Here in Israel, they used to say it was 1,000 shekel per person. I don't think that's true anymore. Maybe, I think it's more. Maybe it's like 1,500 per person. But that's what it would go on. And if you have enough, then you're not eligible to receive from charity fund. So, yes.
Unfortunately, the people who go around collecting money for charity, they keep a percentage for themselves.
Well, that's why they do it. I mean, they also need to make a living.
So that might be why somebody would not be willing to explain that they have insurance.
It has to be honest. That's the bottom line. Right. It has to be honest. Okay, let's just do one more point here before we move on, and that is regarding the meat, eating meat. We discussed this last week, of the details of how it's included in Einik Shabbos, but it's not an obligation in and of itself, and therefore if someone doesn't like meat, he does not have to eat it. So I want to just touch here on the point of being a vegetarian and avoiding eating meat. So there's no problem with avoiding eating meat during the week, but when it comes to Shabbos, since the einig is found in meat and fish, etc., avoiding eating meat and fish compromises on the mitzvah of einig Shabbos. So the answer is as follows. A person who doesn't eat meat and fish, we already discussed last week regarding fish, a person who despises it, right, or because it's bad for his health. If it's bad for the person's health to the point he gets less benefit than pleasure, he gets less pleasure from it than he does, meaning the damage outweighs the pleasure, then he does not have to eat it. He's patur because Shabbos was given la'einig and not l'tzar, was given for pleasure and not for pain. However, in the event that it doesn't cause a person pain, and it's just some other side reason, but there's no tsar involved, then if he does receive pleasure from eating meat or eating fish, he should eat it. The idea of not eating meat or chicken or fish because we don't believe in killing animals or killing living creatures is a heretical belief in Judaism. There's in Sefer HaYikarim of Rabbi Yosef Alba, he discusses this in length about vegetarianism and why this is negated in Judaism, and why Hashem specifically gave this to the humans to be able to eat, in order to show that the human race has an elevation, is more elite than animals, and that because they have an intellect and they have separate obligations. And when human and animal, this is what he writes, that when human and animal are viewed equal, so murdering a human will be viewed the same as murdering an animal, and it can lead to it can lead to a person not giving any difference of life to a human versus an animal. This is what he writes in his statement. Now, a person who, for whatever other reason, says, I believe it's mutter to eat meat. I'm not arguing with the Torah. But I'm queasy about it. I don't feel good about it. That's something else. That's something else. That's, as it's brought down in the Gemara, there were certain people who were forbidden from eating meat, it says. So it's not, there's nothing wrong with on an individual basis with a person not eating meat. For someone to come out and say that we are against killing of animals and fish, that is a problem in Judaism. If a person wants to say, well, I want better standards of care for the slaughter process, okay, no problem, no problem. Fight your agenda. If it's right, we're all for it. If it's not right, we're not for it, but that's not a problem. But the idea of totally negating consumption of meat and fish is not a Jewish idea.
I think you said as far as just as strong personal preference goes, you don't really need to do it.
If a person does, the lashon was, if you get more pain than pleasure, then you don't have to eat it.
Is physical pain or pain?
That was the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch regarding fish. If there's more pain than pleasure in the eating of it, it's talking about someone that's bad for your health. Well, I think there's two things. There's one thing that you enjoy the taste, but it has a detriment. It causes detrimental aspects to your health. So in such a case, so Alte says, if there's more pain than pleasure, you don't have to eat it. However, in a case that you don't like the taste, or you're nauseated. Let's say we can make ourselves nauseated for many things. Everyone has different things they pick that they don't need. As a kid, I wouldn't eat ketchup. I was nauseated by it. I don't know why. It's psychological. Maybe you can explain. But it's just I never said that no one's allowed to eat ketchup. I never said it's forbidden to kill tomatoes. I never said such a thing. All I said was, I don't like it. It's nauseating. So Shabbos is leinik. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Now, we all know you can develop a taste for things, and you can try it out, and that's how you break it. But nonetheless, bottom line is that if you don't like something, obviously you don't have to eat it. But if you do enjoy it, then there is a mitzvah to embellish in Einik Shabbos in eating it.
Charitable. So for people that are collecting money on Friday for Shabbos, what's the right thing to do?
The right thing is to help everyone out. I mean, chas v'shalom, if we would not give out charity because we suspect everyone is a ramai, everyone is a scandler, we would never give charity out. So on the one hand, those who don't give, it says, machzik tuva l'ramayim. The Gemara says, Baruch Shulchan Aruch, we have to give a huge jasher kayach to all of these scandalers that come. And by the way, you can usually tell the real professional ones. They're the ones that are driving the Rolls Royces. They're the ones that are way, way off. They're usually the ones that, it's funny because when the guy comes, he gives a whole speech. He's mamish. Usually that's the guy that he's doing well. The guy that looks like a real schlump and nobody gives him, that's the guy you should give. That's the guy that's a real nebuch. It's the guy that doesn't know how to collect. In any event, but it says that because of the scandalers, therefore, those who don't give tzedakah to those who ask are exempt from the severe prohibition against closing your hands in face of giving charity. The mitzvah in the Torah, posayach tiftach, v'al tisalim. You're not allowed to ignore charity giving. You're not allowed to ignore a person who's asking for charity. But because of these scandalers, therefore, it is mutter because you don't know who this guy is. It does say that to a random individual, you should give them what's called the matana mu'etas, a small present. Don't write out a check for $1,000 to a guy. You have no clue who this guy is. Do your research, do your homework, find out what this guy is representing. And the same thing applies. People call all the time on the telephone and they ask for donations. You have no clue who these people are, and we can't be naive. There are many scammers out there that can make believe that they are representing an organization, and they'll take your credit card. Very, very unsafe and unsmart and irresponsible to give a large donation or your credit card on the phone. So always tell them, no problem, send me a website, send me something that I can see.
Send me a mail.
And that's a better way of being able to be sure. Okay, we are going to move on with our next subject in this chapter, which is regarding challah baking challahs. Okay, so as we read 2 weeks ago and last week in Siman Reish Mem Beis, that thou shalt not buy challah, right? It was in the Ramah. Thou shalt not buy challah from this bakery, from the store for Erev Shabbos, but rather they should knead it themselves. Now we're going to go into all the details behind this and some halachas that have to do with challah baking and separating challah, which are really allocated from Yeridea in chapters 322 and onwards.
The Ramah is
At the end of Sif Aleph, Reish Mem, yeah, you're looking at it right now. Reish Mem Beis, yeah. Okay, so what are the reasons behind the challah baking on Erev Shabbos? So the Ramah gave the reason that it's done for the honor of Shabbos. And what's the honoring of Shabbos of baking challahs rather than purchasing challahs? What's the difference? So there's two reasons brought down. The Mishnah Berurah records that the reason is, as when a person bakes the challah, he is toiling himself or she is toiling herself in the work of the kneading and the baking, all the sidrei, lechem apanim, etc. And by doing so, they are exerting themselves for the sake of Shabbos. And Arizal writes, brought down in the Shari Tshuva, that when one exerts himself for the sake of Shabbos and sweats for the sake of Shabbos, the breakage of the sweat on their face has a similar ability to cries of tshuva, to erase sins from the forehead. It's explained that everyone's actions are written on the forehead. I don't know, by the way, what it says on your foreheads, and most people don't. It's someone who says he does. Those who know don't say, those who say don't know, so don't worry about it. But nonetheless, all of a person's sins are written on their forehead, and this has some practical ramifications. It says, the chas v'shalom, when there's an epidemic in the city, if there's a measles outbreak or whatever else that God should never send us, it says that the Malach HaMavis walks around and looks at the foreheads of people to see, are they deserving of the next spread of the epidemic, chas v'shalom. And therefore it's brought in Svarim, you should walk around with a turban. Shouldn't show them your forehead. Cover the forehead.
That's why the average Lubavitch have droops, maybe.
On the other hand, if you don't want to have to wear something over your forehead, cries of tshuva, tears of tshuva, wipe away and clean the face. It's like a shower, you get rid of the dirt. Or breakage of sweat for the sake of preparing for Shabbos. So writes the Arizal. It's the same segula, has the same ability. We already learned earlier in the Shulchan Aruch, based on the Gemara, that a person who embellishes in Einig Shabbos, he has all of his sins forgiven. So this is a similar idea to that, the statement of the Arizal. So it has Talmudic root, this Arizal statement. And anyway, so that's one reason, as the Mishnah Berurah writes, is the toil, the person's involved. There's a much bigger difference than toiling yourself to make challah than simply buying it at the store. That's number one. Number two, it happens to be that home-baked challah is fresher, it tastes better psychologically, maybe even physically, depends. But that's all. Those are all additional reasons. There's a few other reasons recorded in the Mefarshim, such as the Magen Avram, the Yavitz, and others, and those include the following. The first two reasons that we said only explain why challah should be baked for the sake of Shabbos. It does not explain when it should be done. It does not explain who should do it, and it does not explain how much should be baked. If you looked at the Ramah said explicitly to bake a sheer challah's worth, to separate challah, right? That's what he said. What's the reason? I'm honoring Shabbos with challah, no matter how much of an amount I'm baking, so long as it's enough for my meal. What's the significance? So even though the Shach writes in Yeridea that whenever you have ability to do a mitzvah, it's forbidden to try to circumvent it, such as those people who hate benching for some reason. So they always make sure to eat less than a kazayas within 4 minutes. So they'll look at the clock, 4 minutes has passed, now I can eat another less than a kazayas. Chas v'shalom, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch that a person is not allowed to try to circumvent the mitzvahs. This is also recorded in the Gemara Menachos. Minadin, from the letter of the law, a person is only obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis if they are already wearing or plan to wear a four-cornered garment. If you don't plan to wear one, you have no obligation to wear tzitzis. Or if you don't have any four-cornered garment, nonetheless, b'shas rischa, at a time of anger, of wrath, a person is punished also for not wearing tzitzis, a four-cornered garment. That's what the Gemara says. And from this we learn that even though there's a basic standard for halacha, what a Jew has to keep. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have to go beyond the letter of the law in order to try to serve God in a better way. So although normally nothing happens, but nonetheless, a person doesn't go out of his way to try to do God's will, a time of wrath, that can be held accountable, says the Gemara. And the same idea, if a mitzvah comes to a person's the ability to be fulfilled by an individual, he shouldn't purposely do something to try to circumvent fulfilling the mitzvah. And the same idea applies regarding challah. So if you're baking challah, don't try to specifically bake less in order so you don't have to give that poor kohen, the poor kohen, his piece of challah, or the garbage today. We don't give it to the kohenim anymore, as we'll discuss. So this is one reason. You can say simply, but nonetheless there's another deeper reason, more Kabbalistic reason that answers all of our previous questions, which brings the Magen Avram. You see, a long, long time ago there was an individual named Adam and he had a wife named Eve, Adam and Chava. And the Medrash says that Adam was called Chala Shalaylam. He was the bread of the world, the dough of the world. Hashem created him from clay, right? Earth, some water, clay, and then he formed him, very similar to dough, flour, water, forming him. So he was called, the Medrash says, he was called Isasa Shalaylam or Chala Shalaylam. Now when Chava gave him to eat the Eitz Hadas Teverah, she defiled the Chala of the world. And therefore, says the Medrash, this is based on the Magen Avram, the Shlach Kodesh, that she now has to fix that mistake by fixing the challah. And this is why the mitzvah of Afrashas challah is delegated specifically to the female, to the woman. Meaning, in a home, if you're both involved in baking the challah, or you want to bake the challah this day, you want to make a challah today, you should give and delegate the mitzvah of the hafrasha to the wife. It's her mitzvah, it's her tikkun. Now obviously, unlike the misconception, if there isn't a female available to do so, if the wife is not there to do so, then you are to do so yourself. It's not a mitzvah only on women, it's an absolute obligation on the dough. It doesn't matter which Jew does the act of removal, it has to get done. But nonetheless, when we have a wife available, then the delegation is given to the wife and not the husband. Even if the husband says, well, it's my house, it's my dough, doesn't matter. She receives first dibs. She receives precedence. Same thing with Akas Ner Shabbos. Husband says, I want to try it out one day. I want to do it one time. You do it every single week. She can say, light your own candles somewhere else. Don't get into my candles. These are my candles. This is my mitzvah. It's halacha. Although there too, if the wife isn't around, then of course the obligation falls on the husband. In the case that the wife isn't home and it's a daughter, you don't have to give the daughter the Afrashas challah. You can do it yourself. She doesn't receive precedence over the Balabayas, but nonetheless, as we are saying, since the challah of the world was tainted by the action of Chava, therefore the women have been delegated the mitzvah of fixing challah shalaylam through doing the mitzvah of Afrashas challah.
The daughters lighting candles are just extra anyway, then daughters are, when they do it, which we do.
In a home with a mother?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not minadin, it's not required. Yeah, it's a hiddur. Similar to us lighting Ashkenazi custom of the extra family members lighting Hanukkah candles. It's a hiddur, it's mahadran, right? Ner Yishu Beisa. This reason also explains to us why it's done in Erev Shabbos. As when did the sin of the Eitz Hadas, when was the challah of the world tainted and defiled with the eating of the Eitz Hadas? Erev Shabbos. So therefore also the baking is done Erev Shabbos. So that explains to us that it should be done by the woman on Erev Shabbos. And you do Afrashas challah because that's the whole tikkun, that's the whole fixing. If you don't separate the challah, if you make less, you miss the point, according to this reason. Another reason reported for this mitzvah, again answering why it's done specifically Erev Shabbos, is that it's keneged the lechem apanim. We no longer have a lechem apanim in the actual temple to be offered to God as a karban on every Shabbos, and in corresponding to that, we make our own lechem apanim, make our own challahs on our own. And just like the lechem apanim was baked on Friday and not on Shabbos, right? It was set up on Shabbos, but it was baked on Erev Shabbos. Ein afiyas alechem apanim deicha Shabbos, so writes the Gemara and the Rambam in Hilchos Tmidin Umusafin. So The baking took place Erev Shabbos, and in commemoration of that, we too bake it on Erev Shabbos, and we shouldn't look at this reason as just a nice allegorical reason recorded in some Mefarshim. The Yavitz brings this, but there is very deep meaning to God's eyes when a person does this in commemoration of the Shtei Alechem. So we know the famous story of the simple Tzfas Jew, who, when he heard from the rabbi in shul that Shabbos that God is missing his lechem upon him in Parshas Truma, he told his wife, we are going to give it to him, and he started baking and bringing every Erev Shabbos to the Aron. And I said that Hashem said, the Arizal said that Hashem said, since that day he did not receive as much pleasure as the original lechem upon him. So we see that when a Jew does something earnestly, it is able to have an effect. Now, practically, if a person is unable to bake it on Erev Shabbos, the mitzvah still applies. It's not the full mitzvah with all the good details, all the Mahadran scrupulous details that we would want, but nonetheless, he still has the advantage of doing the tikkun of Rosh Hashanah and going ahead and having kvoid and einik Shabbos with fresh home-baked bread. So you can technically do it Thursday, you can do it Wednesday if necessary. The best time is Friday, but it could be done. Also, Thursday night is also Rev Shabbos, by the way, so that's another time that it could be done. Regarding some of the schools associated with challah is parnasa. As we know, it says the Mefarshim bring that the challah, the lechem upon him in the temple, in the Mishkan, that was responsible for the financial state, the kalkala, the finances, the economy of the entire world. So if we had a month of very delicious, good baked lechem upon him, stock market was high, mortgages are up, people are doing business, Baruch Hashem, no unemployment, everything's good in the world. But when the lechem upon him came out bad, the kalkala, the economy would have a drop. So we see that the lechem upon him actually affected the parnasa of the world, and therefore there's also a segula in baking challahs for this purpose. So with all knowing, having all this information, why is it that so many people today don't bake challah for Shabbos? People view it as like a nice thing to do. It's a nice thing. You do what you want. You want to do it, you do. You don't want to do it, you don't do it. You have time, you do it. You have time, you don't do it. It's not a chiv, it's not an obligation. That's how people view it. But we already read the Lashon in the Shulchan Aruch, and Alte, no one argues on this, and Alte Rebbe likewise records it. Ein l'shanis. This is the custom, and you're not allowed to swerve from it. All right? One is not to divert from this custom. When a person buys from the store, they are diverting from the custom. You're not allowed to buy from the store. This is the minhag. So some of Poskim Dereinu have dealt with this question, and they've given the answer that unfortunately today certain things have changed in society that have limited the woman's ability to be able to fulfill this minhag as it used to be done in yesterday. What is the change? That a lot of women today have careers, they have jobs, they work. So if they're working on Thursday and working on Wednesday and working on Erev Shabbos, when do you want the challahs to get baked? They have angels to do it for them. How is it going to get done? So they have no choice. They have no choice, no time. So they have someone, so they buy from the store. They don't have ability. This is the reason that some give. Others say that the challahs of the bakery today are just as fresh and just as tasty, so what's the difference? I don't want to say anything bad, but it all depends on whose wife is baking the challah and which bakery you're buying from. But nonetheless, these are all limudei zchus, trying to learn merit on Bnei Yisrael who are no longer accustomed to fathers. But nonetheless, as we stated, certainly everyone should try to do so. And as I say, until you do it, it seems impossible. And once you do it, you see, how did I never do this to begin with? So try and see. We're going to give some final concluding halachas regarding hafrashas challah and different matters involved with it. So this may be new to men, but just to know statistically, the facts, more men do hafrashas challah than women. For the simple reason that most mashkichim are male, and most hafrashas challah is taking place in the industry, in the bakery, not in your home. There's more baked products being baked in bakeries and commercially than there are in homes, I believe. And so that would mean that there are more hafrashas challah is being done in a greater amount by men than by women. Now, so we're going to view some of these halachas. Those who have the wives do it at home. Obviously, the wives have to be made aware of all of these details. How much flour does a person need to do hafrashas challah? Again, this is all from Yeridei. This is a small glimpse into Yeridei Hilchos challah in chapter 322 and other selected chapters there. So it's not on any amount. You have to have a certain minimum amount of flour or dough or bread in order to do a hafrashas challah. The Torah says that it's going to be done on a isarin. What's an isarin? So an isarin is 43.1/5 of an egg. Now, how big are the eggs? Now, we all know, without getting into a tangent, that there is a major debate on what is the size of an egg in reference to the kibetza of Chazal. In other words, whenever the sages or the Poskim record a measurement of kibetza like an egg, practically how much is it? So you may say, well, let me just take an egg and I'll measure and I'll weigh it. Or let me just take an egg and I will measure its volume by seeing the level of water dissipated when I place it into a filled container. That's how I know the volume, how much cc it takes up. However, who says the eggs that we have today are the same size of the eggs of back then? So this is the famous machlekes. The Avram Chaim Noah was on the side that the eggs of today are the eggs of back then. Business as usual, nothing has changed. While the Chazon Ish took the position that no, the eggs of today are midgets. The eggs of back then were more like ostriches, and the ostriches were more like the size of basketballs. So this is a machlekes. This is not their personal machlekes. The Chazon Ish is just coined for that position, that shita. But in truth, he is backed by many Rishonim and Achrayim, the Rebbe Yehuda, the Tashbetz. There's a lot of Poskim who rule that way. And so too, Rav Avram Chaim Noah is not the owner of that opinion. He's just, it's coined by him, but he has backing him the Rambam, majority of the Rishonim, a majority of the Poskim, and Minhag Yisrael. Practically, the ramification in hafrashas challah is that the Chazon Ish's opinion, his approach, and those who go like him, hold that it's almost double the amount. So by us, those who follow the Grachna, which is all Ashkenazim, which is all Sfardim, as well as Chabad, of course, and most Chassidim, we hold that it is for the 43.25 eggs, is 1,666 grams of flour. 1.66 kilos, or 1.67 kilos to round it off. Okay, that means one bag plus slightly less than 2/3 of a bag of flour, basically. One whole bag is something like 2/3 of a bag of flour. That is what is chayiv in hafrashas challah with a blessing. That's for sure chayiv. You have to take off challah from that. The Chazon Ish would hold that no, it's almost double. You need to have over 2,500. 2250, sorry. 2250, the Chazon Ish holds you have to have 2250, over 2 bags of flour. So this is a machlekes. As I said, each one is to follow their custom, their tradition. By Chassidim, certainly we follow the lower one. Now, there's another tradition that's recorded from the Tzemach Tzedek that many in Chabad have, and that is a lesser amount of 1,213 grams. 1213, okay? Some have that tradition. Those who do and they follow it 100%, they have their tradition to do so. It is not, however, considered the Chabad custom. It's a custom of some who affiliate with Chabad, and the custom of others who affiliate with Chabad do, as I said, the Grachna, 1,666 grams of flour.
Is that regular size challah? Is that translated?
After it's turned into dough? I mean, depends how big you're making your challahs.
It's the regular kind that you see in the bakery that you shouldn't be buying.
I don't know. I don't know how much dough it takes for them to make that challah.
1,166 grams, 1166.
1,666.
1 2/3.
Yeah.
3 over 3 pounds.
Right.
So if your wife is making less than that, then
if you're making less than the 1.6 kilo, then if it's still more than 1.25, you would separate without a blessing, out of doubt, without a bracha. And if it's less than 1.25, you don't separate at all. If you're making a small, you're making a small batch, you want to make pizza dough. You're using 1 kilo of flour. You don't separate challah, not according to anybody. There's no need to separate challah from that. And it's not considered you're circumventing the mitzvah. I don't want to eat more. I'm not interested. I have to go to waste. I have to throw food in the garbage because in order to do the mitzvah. I was talking about don't make less just for the purpose of circumventing. I'm making less because I don't need more. Then you're not.
But it seems like you want to do the mitzvah so we're being told we should make that much.
For Erev Shabbos, yes. That's the difference. When you're making pizza, I agree with you. You are allowed. You're not circumventing. Or for Erev Shabbos, 100%. You should specifically. So therefore, it's better to bake a large amount, freeze it for the next week, and do a fresh challah than to bake less than a fresh challah each week and have the fresh bread.
Then you don't have the mitzvah the next week.
You're right. But at least you have the mitzvah 1 week.
Oh, well, that's a question,
Right. Yeah.
What's the threshold again that is no separating, no bracha, 1.25?
For our custom, less than 1.2.
1.2 less. Where does that figure come from?
These shitas are all based on calculations that are done in the measurement of the kibetza, as our opinion goes, that it's the same as back in the times of Chazal, that our egg is the same as the egg back then. So each egg is about 55 grams, so do that times 43.25, and that's how it comes. So now don't forget, all the shiurim and Torah are actually in volume and not in weight. Shiurim is a whole shiur of its own. It's probably about 15 shiurim that I would need to give in order to, it's very complex. But just for us to know that this calculation is after going through a number of different factors, such as measuring volume, the volume of the shiur. Then since it's difficult, not everyone knows how to measure volume. It's a lot more. It's a lot easier to measure weight than to measure volume. You see, you have a kilo. You see how much flour you have. But to measure volume, you have to see how much it dissipates of water, how much cc it takes up. It's not so simple. So because of this, we just practically, for simplicity purposes, we always just measure using weight. As in most cases, the weight will include the volume in any event. Unless something is much denser, that's something else. But if it's lighter, then the weight will include the volume. And so in this situation, it definitely that the minig is to measure in weight. And that's why when you ask how many cups of flour is it for shir challah, what do you mean cups? Cups is volume. A cup, the measurement of a cup is a volume. It's cc. So if you have fluffy flour, you're going to be putting less weight of flour in your cup. If you have denser flour, you're going to be putting more flour in your cup. So it's very difficult to come to a conclusive measurement when you're referring to volume.
If you make 1.67 this week and you freeze the extras, when you're freezing the extras, can you have in mind that you're taking it out next week when you're going to take out the frozen challah?
What do you mean? I mean, why not?
Say in your mind.
On Shabbos?
Yeah.
Even if you don't have the money, you could take out frozen challah
No,
on
but to
Shabbos.
say that you're saying the blessing for it, you said that if it's below a certain amount, there's no
Correct,
blessing.
no
So
blessing.
In between, there's a doubt, so you take out, but you don't say the blessing, and if it's above a certain amount, you take out.
That's going on, right. So I added water to the flour, I created the dough, I separate challah with a bracha if it has the amount. If it doesn't have the amount, then I don't. This separation is done as dough.
As dough.
Yeah. We only do the separation after it's baked if you forgot, or by matzahs.
Yeah.
That's the only time you would do a fresh challah after it's already baked. Otherwise, you do it always when it's dough lechatchila. How much dough is one to separate? So the halacha used to be when the kohanim were all pure and we knew exactly who they were for certain. There was actual real yichus, right? Then in that time, when there was a real yichus of kahuna, we would have to give the kohen 1/24th. Nice amount. Every kohen would have to get a nice amount of afrashas challah. It would be 2 afrashas, 2 separations. So every batch of dough would have a nice amount given to the kohen, slightly about 4%.
1/24th of what?
Sorry, what, two?
One was for, we would do 2, right, we would do 2 afrashas. It slipped my mind in the moment. I'll have to relook it up. It's in the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea. Today we only do one because we don't give to the kohen. Why do we not give to the kohen? Because the challah can only be eaten in purity. That's the first reason. The second reason is because, no offense, we don't really know which kohen is a real kohen. Yehuda Chassid writes that a group of kohenim were walking with Reb Sadia Gaon in Har HaZeisim, and they told Reb Sadia, "We can't walk in this area. There's kavarim. We're kohenim." And Reb Sadia started laughing. Yes, what's so funny? He said, "I'm walking here with Eliyahu Navi, and he already told me that none of you guys are kohenim except for that guy over there." Now, Eliyahu Navi, according to many Mefarshim, was a kohen. This is his family. So, so because of the lack of chazakah, so there's different levels, right? So for the idea of getting blessings for the kohanim and to giving them first aliyahs, it's not a problem. It doesn't cost us anything. But anything that costs us money, anything that requires us is a klal and chesed mishpat, right? We go versus chazakah. If someone wants to take from me a fresh challah, they have to prove their kuna status. So 1 second, but so then don't separate at all. Explains in Rebbe Yehuda that the mitzvah of a fresh challah is 2 points, and this was why we separated twice. One is to fix the isa, to fix the dough, that the dough should be fixed metukun, and the second is for the sake of giving to the kohen. So today we won't give to the kohen, we only take off the first. So how much do you have to give? Minadin, any amount. Any amount that you take off from the challah fixes the challah and fulfills the mitzvah, but the minig is to do a kazayas. That's the custom. So we take off 27 grams worth of dough, okay? But minadin, any amount is good.
In those days, what did they do with the second? What
Give
did
it
they
to
do?
the kohen.
No, the other one. It's first.
Right, I said I have to relook it up. I have to review it.
Today we do 2.
We do one.
Oh, we only do 1.
Only one afresh and any amount. Minadin, any amount. So if someone says, well, I'm not sure how much to take off, and some people want to be very machzor to take a huge amount. No need. The kazayis is only a minog.
Okay, and that's linked to the fixing the challah aspect.
Correct.
Not
Correct.
giving to the kohen.
We don't give to the kohen anymore.
You gotta do it symbolically.
Yeah.
What do you mean fixing the challah?
It's considered tevel before you take off the freshest challah. So by taking it off, that's considered a tikkun. That's why we can't do it on Shabbos. You can't fix things on Shabbos.
And the burning
We're going to get to that in a moment, okay? The saying of the bracha, okay? So there's 2 different ways of this. We say a bracha of lahafresh challah. Some add min ha'isa. That is not necessarily the Chabad custom, but some do add min ha'isa. And after the blessing of lahafresh challah is recited, we say Harei Zu Challah. Some are not accustomed to say Harei Zu Challah. Nonetheless, the widespread custom is to say it, and this was also the custom by the Rebbe. This is what the Rebbe did by Hafrashas Challah, by his matzahs. The Rebbe said Harei Zu Challah. And I'll explain the differences between saying it versus not, and also when to say the bracha. The question is, when should the bracha of Hafresh Challah be said? Before you separate the piece or after you separate? So if you first separate the piece, we know there's a rule, you can't say a bracha after the action has been done. Blessings have to be said prior to the action of the mitzvahs. On the other hand, if something only becomes challah once you designate it. So if I simply plucked a piece of dough off and I didn't yet turn it into challah, so what did I do wrong? So basically it's like this. The custom of some, which is a more widespread custom, is that you designate an area of the dough. You don't pluck it off yet. You say the bracha, and then you pluck it off, and then you say Harei Zu Challah. Okay? So that fulfills everything. You're doing it before the removal, and only after the removal you're turning into challah. However, others, they do it afterwards. They first pluck it off, then they say the bracha, and then they say Harei Zu Challah. And that's also okay, because once again, it doesn't become challah until you say the words Harei Zu Challah. That's when you're doing the mitzvah. You're turning it into challah. It's not some prayer. It's not some Kabbalistic saying. It's the turning. It's the mitzvah itself. Now, those who don't say Harei Zu Challah, why don't they say it? Because they consider that as soon as you pluck it, you've already turned it into challah. So they must first say the bracha. You can't go with both minhagim. You can't also not say Harei Zu Challah and also say the bracha after you plucked it off. That's no good.
The designating action is, how is that done again? It's just a cabana? Can you point to a place?
Yeah, you make a little ball, still attached, and you pluck it off.
Or you leave it in the challah?
Yeah,
and pluck it off again?
Yep.
You form it with your hand?
Yeah, yeah.
23 years, I've never inspected this whole process in my home. I've seen this being done.
Based on this, we can understand if someone already separated the challah and forgot to say the bracha, if they didn't yet say rezu challah, they can still say the bracha because you haven't yet turned it into challah until you say it. But if you're not accustomed to say rezu challah, then you've already turned it into challah, so the blessing can no longer be said. What do we do with the challah that is separated? So the halach in Shulchan Aruch is it's got to be burnt. Why do we have to burn it? As the piece of dough that's separated for Afrashas challah is considered kadesh, it is holy, but it is also impure, tameh. So due to this, no one's allowed to eat it, not even a kohen that is a real kohen, that's muhsak as a kohen. Not even he can eat it. So therefore it has to be gotten rid of, because there's nothing else to do with it. Why do we say to burn it? Because there's a rule, anything that's not kosher, doesn't matter if it's not kosher due to being part of the 3 unclean klippas, such as pork, or basar v'chalav, meat and milk, or due to being too holy for us, such as karbanis, it's got to be burnt in order so people do not stumble and eat it. When you leave food in your house, people eventually stumble and eat it, make mistakes. So therefore, the challah has to be burnt. This automatically negates the custom, which is a mistake, to leave the dough in the freezer until Sveifas Chametz. This is not good. This is against halacha, because a person may have a michshol, may stumble and come to eat the dough. And a person shouldn't say this doesn't happen. It does happen. Someone once told me, well, I want to tell you a story that we used to keep it in the freezer and we stopped because of this mice. And they didn't know about the halachas. They just stopped because of the mice. Their son came home one week from the army. No one was home Motzei Shabbos. He looked in the freezer, found some dough, made himself a pizza. Came home, it was delicious. Mom, thanks so much. I didn't know you saved dough in the freezer for pizza purposes. So that was the last time she did. And then I said, well, that's why we have a halacha. You cannot store it. It has to be burnt. It has to be discarded. Nonetheless, you have a month or 2 months. We give a month or 2 months to get rid of it. After that, we begin suspecting for a michshol, for a stumbling block.
Burn it, ideally.
So burning it. So regarding burning it, practically, even though this is the halacha, practically what we suggest is that it should not be burned in your food oven. If you have a tin can, which you can do right now, the next time you open a tin can, save it and save it for your challah burning process, no problem. That's fine. But if you want to burn it in your oven or on your stovetop where you have kosher food that's going to be cooked in the future, in essence, you are baking or cooking non-kosher in your oven. Now, how many people feel comfortable baking and cooking non-kosher in the oven? Now, if they did so,
I'll wait.
if they did so, that doesn't mean the oven or stove has become not kosher. Just because you baked something not kosher in the oven doesn't mean it's always not kosher. It depends on the situation. So if the challah was wrapped up in tinfoil and did not become exposed through the baking, and it was inside the tinfoil the whole time, or if it was on top of your stove, of your grates, and no part of the dough ever touched the grates because it's on a piece of tinfoil, so technically it's okay, no problem. But nonetheless, because people aren't always able to be careful with this, and sometimes the dough opens up and breaks through the tinfoil in the process, and as we said, this dough is not kosher. Therefore, it's better to avoid it, because we see when people do this, people are not careful to avoid and can end up chafing up their kitchen. Such as one woman who said, she came with a shayla, and she said, I just found out that the challah is not kosher. I had no idea, and I used to use my forks every Erev Shabbos to stab the challah to make sure it was burnt. So that means all of her forks are treif, because they need lib and gomer done to them, and you can't do lib and gomer to a fork.
Challah is not kosher.
When I mean challah, I mean the afrashas challah,
What do you mean
the
that
piece
wasn't
that was separated. It's not kosher. You can't eat it. It's forbidden to be eaten. That's why it's got to be burnt.
Why was she saying mine was kosher? It's all
No,
kosher.
she never knew that this concept that the piece you separate is actually like non-kosher food.
How does something burn if it's wrapped in tinfoil?
If you leave it, it becomes hard, it becomes ash. If you leave it long enough, sure, like toast.
Okay,
Right.
now, we have a stove that has a piece that you put on the element, and on that piece, you put the challah that you're gonna burn. And that's, we found out about
So long as it's not touching any part of the material that you use to cook your food, meaning the dough itself, and you're not using any kosher utensils to stab it with, then it's fine, it's okay. I'm just saying you have to be careful. So because not a lot of people know to be careful, and don't forget, we also have children. So the parents knew about all this, they learned, and they're careful. But the daughter doesn't know. She starts a Bais Yisrael. She follows her mother's minhag, but she didn't know about that her mother was careful to never stab the challah. So these things can create mechshalim, and therefore the rabbinical directive is simply wrap it in a piece of, in a bag, and throw it in the garbage, because garbage too gets discarded and eventually eaten away, either due to acid or due to actual burning.
So no burning is necessary then in your own home. You just
Unless if you really want to do it and not get into a problem of kashrus, then as I said, get yourself a tin can and burn it in your tin can.
with like a match or something, you just so I can make it.
You can pour kerosene in there. You can do whatever you want.
You can just throw it away. You wrap it up and throw it away.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
One second. We have one last halacha we want to finish.
we were trying to quit at 20 after, but 25 after.
We're
would be-
11:22. We're okay. We have 8 minutes.
Oh, I didn't have, I have 11:26 already.
Oh, where's 11:25?
Up there now.
Oh, 26. Okay. I mean, every clock says something else.
28.
All right.